And when we talk about renewables, and the last graph was wind power. This is renewables in general. You can see there's the same exponential growth of renewable power globally. And there's a couple of things I want to point out here. One is that when we talk about renewables, wind power often gets a lot of attention. And the reason is, as you can see on that particular graph there, that wind power represents about half of the investment in renewable power technology. So there's obviously all sorts of technologies out there, but wind is generally the most cost-efficient technology out there right now, so it's getting the most attention. But it certainly isn't the only technology out there. The other important thing to see is you can see this graph is a couple of years old, and 2008 was actually a record year for renewable power. And there was more money invested in 2008. The UN reported there was more money went into developing wind power and solar power and the other renewables combined than was invested in nuclear power, coal-powered electricity, and natural gas energy or electricity combined. So 2008 was the first year that renewable energy actually garnered more investment than traditional sources of power. And 2009 actually was a record year, despite the global recession. 2009 was actually a better year than 2008. So we are seeing a boom in this industry. It's becoming a serious player and on the global stage. And Germany is the one country we often like to point to in terms of the development that's going on in that country. You can see this is 2008, so $50 billion industry in Germany, and almost 300,000 people directly employed in the renewable energy industry in Germany. Germany, interestingly, even though they have about 3 times as many people, Germany has the same size electricity system as Canada does. So in some ways, Germany is an interesting comparison for Canada, even though it's a much more populated country. So Germany certainly isn't the only country that's interested in renewable energy. The United States last year became the largest market for wind power on the planet, and China is about to overtake the United States. You can see the amount of people employed in renewables. The United States, this number is a couple of years old now, but the United States, 85,000 people employed in wind energy alone. And there's about 80,000 coal miners in the United States. So there's actually more people employed in wind power than in coal mining in the U.S. So we are talking about a pretty big industry now. But so those are 2008 numbers. But 2008 really, when you look at exponential growth, 2008 is really ancient history. Things have changed a huge amount even in the last year and a half. And this is an interesting study that came out of the IEA just recently, suggesting that in 40 years, solar power could be about 25%, or about a quarter, or I guess closer to a fifth of all of the world's electricity supply. So that's solar power. So people often think of solar as being a nice thing to put in your cottage or on a street light or something like that. This is the International Energy Agency saying this could be close to a fifth of the world's electricity supply. So we are talking big business. We are talking. This is the kind of scale that I think we need to be thinking about. And in fact, the head of the United States, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. This is basically the head of the energy department in the United States, or the head regulator in the United States, so equivalent to Canada's National Energy Board. The head of that, his statement recently in the New York Times was that renewable energy has advanced to the point that we would never need to build a new coal plant or a new nuclear plant in the United States. So that's John Wellinghoff, the head of FERC, saying that, not the Pembina Institute or not Greenpeace. This is coming from top dog. So I'm diverting a little bit from what the report is talking about, but I want to sort of set the stage in terms of this is the scale of development that we're talking about, and this is the scale of development that we need to be thinking about. This is a big deal now. This isn't we don't need to be thinking about in terms of a community here, community there, but this is at a massive national scale. So there's all sorts of different types of development that can happen when we're talking about renewables, and when we want to talk about the rural and the remote context. The countries that are really some of the leaders in developing renewables have also done so in really incorporating rural and remote communities. So I guess not remote, but rural development and farmers into that picture. Germany, which is the leader or has been the leader up until the last year in installed wind power, almost half of the wind turbines in Germany are co-owned or cooperatively owned by rural communities or by farmers. In Denmark, it's almost 85% of the wind turbines in Denmark are cooperatively owned or owned by the local communities where the technology is developed, or where that technology is situated. And a lot of people credit those particular aspects as why those countries have been able to develop wind power so extensively, because the local communities own the turbines. It's kind of your own pigs don't stink type philosophy, where Some people don't like the looks of these machines, but when you own it, when you're making money from it, when you're a part of it, it helps to develop. It helps smooth some of that development. So obviously there's all sorts of benefits to local ownership. It means that you're going to keep some of those costs local, some of the costs stay internal. In a remote community context, it means you're not spending money on diesel fuel, which is leaving the community all the time. There's obviously local control. You're making local decisions in terms of where the machines get put, what type of technology you want. It is a use of traditional land. In many cases, is cooperative, I guess, or can coexist with traditional uses like farming. And then obviously the ethos of reducing impacts on future generations. And I think a big thing too is looking at economic diversification, particularly in farming communities, where essentially wind power or other renewables can become an additional crop or an additional annual source of revenue. At the same time, there are risks to owning developing projects locally, as opposed to having someone else come and develop them. Obviously, there's financial risks. These types of technologies cost lots of money. Getting your hands on the capital can be a big problem. Obviously, there's one thing to have a huge financial cost. There's another barrier in terms of actually being able to finance that capital cost, or basically getting a bank to lend you the money. There's risks in terms of project development. You may spend the money on a feasibility study, putting up an anemometer, doing some of the research, and then find out you actually don't have the resource you thought you had, and then you've lost some money. So there's risk in terms of just doing the upfront research. It can be difficult when you're talking from a cooperative model versus, or a rural development model versus a private developer coming to develop. There's going to be risks in terms of competing for grid access, or competing for capital, or competing for resources. And so you are going to be in competition with the private sector. And then obviously there's opportunity costs. In terms of if you're going to put up for example, there's a large solar farm just north of Ottawa here, an arm farm, and basically it's used up the entire field with solar panels, and so there's an opportunity cost in terms of lost crops in that sense. So, having worked with a bunch of remote communities and northern communities, I just wanted to talk a bit about some of the I don't want to certainly speak on behalf of these communities, but these are some of the issues that have come up when I have spoken, I've been in some of those communities, why they're interested in developing renewable power. The rising cost of energy, particularly in remote communities, is one that just keeps coming up over and over again. I remember I was up in Sax Harbor, which is it's in the Beaufort Sea, so north of Inuvik, north of Tuktoyaktuk. It's one of the islands on the sort of the northwest coast of Canada. And I was up there in February 2002, and what that happened is they had to buy their entire year's worth of diesel fuel on one day. So they buy their year's worth of diesel, they get it barged up, and they buy it on the spot market. They happened to buy their diesel fuel the day the war in Iraq broke out, and the price for diesel had skyrocketed that day. So they were paying the price the day that the United States invaded Iraq for that entire year. So there's obviously, they're seeing that peak, that spike price, which they basically had to pay for the electricity for the entire year. But also it was just, this is George Bush invading Saddam Hussein, and this is a tiny community in Sax Harbor is basically paying the price for international events. And I think there was this feeling of helplessness that somehow we're beholden to these crazy decisions that are going on globally.